All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I know we still have people that are joining, so I will continue to admit folks while we just kind of wait here. But thanks for everyone for hopping on this lovely Thursday afternoon. I know, Drew, you're in San Antonio, and I'm in Houston. I don't know about you, but the heat has already started building. Um,
Yeah, I believe, and don't quote me on this one. We've broken two records in May already in terms of a peak. So exciting start to the summer season, and kind of adios to the shoulder months as we used to think of them, because they
yes.
don't really exist anymore. So yeah, good start.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed all of the 3 days of spring that we got here in Houston. I really did. It was awesome. But I will take that over some of the weather that our brethren north of us are getting up in Oklahoma, Kansas, and oh man, I'll take that, and I'll even take a little bit of a hurricane over a tornado any day.
Any
Um,
day, any day. You can
uh,
prepare for a hurricane.
yes, but it's amazing how many people don't. We could do a whole podcast on that. That'd be fun. And share stories because I know you were here too helping out. So
I was in Houston during Hurricane Beryl, and I was there to witness the rapid unintended deconstruction of the entire distribution system. And shout out to my friends at Centerpoint. They did a masterful job of
absolutely.
pulling that back together. But we learned a lot of lessons, and some of them we're going to cover today
Yeah.
around how we build the grid going forward. So super excited, about this, not about the hurricanes, but excited to be able to learn from it.
Yeah. Hey, and big shout out to our mutual friend, Mr. Jason Ryan, because God knows he was taking a large portion of the hits, but he was out there every day. That man was visible. All right. Well, we'll get started here. So again, thank you everyone for joining here, talking about electrification and the impacts and the things that are happening here in the state of Texas, the great state of Texas. Just by way of introduction, my name is JT Thompson. I am the Chief Revenue Officer for Edge Zero, which is an Australian-based company that works on providing visibility on the grid edge. It's been a long time in this energy industry, both from the trading side of natural gas to working with distribution utilities and working for big four of manufacturers. So I feel like I've seen a lot, done a lot, got a few T-shirts still in the closet. But with me is my good friend and a longtime friend, Mr. Drew Higgins. And Drew, introduce yourself, and I guess we can get this party started.
Absolutely. So, Drew Higgins, I have over 20 years in various industries. Apparently, I'm a dilettante. I can't figure out what I want to do when I grow up. But the good news is that there is a string throughout those careers, both involving, leadership, rapid learning, technical innovation, and most of all, bringing impact to customers. And so, my career started, I was a Marine Corps officer in the aviation field, transitioned from that into fintech right before the bubble burst. My timing was amazing. Went into fintech. At USAA, launched a bunch of different mobile applications, learned the mobile world very closely, and then learned data back in, the data back end that kind of powers the mobile world and the digital world. Took that expertise to General Motors, where I helped General Motors build out their data back end, learned about things like digital twin, advanced manufacturing, as well as kind of diversified intelligence, as well as the Internet of Things. Took that learning along with the experience I got from working with DTE on electrification to CPS Energy in San Antonio, where I truly learned like what it means to be a community steward. CPS Energy is an amazing organization where they're dedicated to helping the individual customer out. It's truly a partnership between the citizens of San Antonio and the executive leadership there to bring the most value to the city. And most of all, the biggest thing I learned from CPS Energy is service. The technical aspects of it were great, but figuring out how to bring value to the individual customer at every stage is critical. And shout out to Deanna Hardwick on the customer side, as well as Richard Medina on the energy side. Rudy Garza, just a great leader, and I have so much affection for that organization. I left from there to go to KPMG. I had to stop kind of in the middle there, working with the PUC on the aggregated distributed energy resource team, building how VPPs work in Texas, which was foundational to kind of my follow-on learning. Working with KPMG on working with grids around the world on how we're going to take the grid of today, which is actually the grid of 100 years ago, and make it ready for the grid of tomorrow. And that's where I'm now, right? So I'm going, from place to place, kind of like, Chicken Little saying the sky is falling, because we have, 500 megawatt loads that, board operators can't look into. And we have small cities, charging electric vehicles in the middle of cities. And there's some issues there, but none of it is unsolvable. So super excited to get into this conversation. And thanks, JT, for having me.
Absolutely, looking forward to this. And yes, we were sharing a lot of time on the ADER task force. That was so in fact, I think I still have the little monument behind me from when we did the year tour of duty on that one. So I'm really looking forward, to this discussion, and the way we're going to kind of structure this for those that have joined is, Drew's going to kind of take us through his learnings and some of the thoughts that he has around electrification. And then I'm going to really, take a little tour outside of the state of Texas to learn how electrification in other parts of both here and, I say here being the U.S. and abroad, have really impacted the grid, and some lessons learned, and what needs to be done. And then really at that point, we're just going to be bantering back and forth, Drew and I, and we'll definitely take questions. Don't forget to put them in the Q&A section. We'll be happy to answer anything. And if you know Drew or me, or Drew or I, we leave no stone unturned, and we are not afraid to speak our opinion on damn near about anything. So with that, Drew, I want to kick it over to you, and we can get started.
All right, so we'll hop right into it, and you can skip right to the meat of it, right? And so we're kind of in the middle of a generational shift in electricity demand, not only across Texas, but across the world. I mean, we're just seeing unprecedented load increases, which is really different, because for the past, since the year 2000, load growth was anemic, 1.5 to 1%, annually. And it's really weird, because we get to 2021, 2022, and we just see explosive load growth. Now, a lot of people think it's just data centers, but it's driven not by any one factor. It's a convergence of many data centers for the electrification, electrified buildings, entire industrial campuses coming online within months, not years. Where, before, in the early, 2000 teens, you would have studies, and it would take, a lot of planning and working with the city to get buildings up. Now you have individuals that come in, do an engineering request, and want to get a building up and running, within 6 months to a year, which is really challenging. And it's a muscle, along with general load growth, that utilities are having to kind of exercise now. The demand is real, and so is the growing pains. Fleet charging, for example, it doesn't just add load, it adds complexity. The sites often cluster together and spike during evening peaks, right when people are coming home, they want to charge. And it's at the same time when the grid sometimes is really stressed out, especially in Texas when it gets hot. Traditional grid planning can't keep up with this. Interconnection studies that once were fine, they were adequate for incremental growth, a half a megawatt here, a half a megawatt now. They lag so far behind. They're becoming barriers to economic development, right? And so when this process of interconnecting is getting in the way, two things happen. Well, one of two things happen. Either political pressure and stress is added to the entity, or companies go around that entity, and that entity generally is a utility. Let's see, next slide. Okay, so real-time infrastructure monitoring, did kind of a hard shift from the previous slide. Most utilities today are operating with limited visibility of the edge. It's just the facts of things. And this is one of the things I learned, and JT can attest to this on the ADER task force, is ERCOT was, and rightly so, adamant about VPPs in Texas looking like power plants to grid operators. And there's a great reason why. And I didn't, at the time, I just thought that they were being an impediment to kind of the growth of VPPs in Texas. And I was all ornery about it. But the truth of the matter is, if they can't see it, the board operators, and they can't react in enough time to mitigate any issues. And so a couple of examples, in July of last summer, a substation went down in Virginia. The substation caused a voltage drop, a voltage fluctuation, which caused a data center to pop off. Well, just in case you don't like, data centers do not like, what we would call dirty power. Their systems are both discrete and delicate, and they will disconnect in a hot second. Like, you're not taking this with, you're not going to do any damage to our systems. And generally, data centers have about 120% of resiliency requirements. So they have no problem switching the backup until the power gets to something that's acceptable to them. The problem is that causes a voltage spike, right? And while most systems can handle, a 20 megawatt, a 40 megawatt spike, what happened in Virginia was, that spike it was like a 40 megawatt spike, and then two adjacent data centers saw that spike, and then they tripped off, and all of a sudden you have over 100 megawatts of voltage. And there's like, we can handle when generation goes offline pretty well because we can shed load. There's not a lot that on the transmission or distribution systems you can do for excess generation, right? It's a problem. And so the fix of that problem, in my opinion, and from my professional perspective, is advance notice and understanding of what's going on inside of those systems. And this goes all the way down to the transformer level, right? And so eventually, every utility will have to get real-time data on transformer load and health. They can't be flying by, and when those transformers fail at that level, especially in urban areas or fleet hubs, the impacts aren't just financial, they're operational, and they're cascading. And so this is often I talk about, do you want to start from the top down or the bottom up? This is the bottom up, and this is foundational utilities in the future. They have to understand and have real-time monitoring of what's going on their systems. By proactively tracking equipment health and load profiles, utilities can predict failures before they happen. They can defer capital spending with precision and even enable dynamic load management, particularly critical for fleet sites that ramp up charging demand rapidly. You look at the Amazons of the world, huge load profiles, generally in dense population centers that have ramification impact, have huge ramifications in terms of impact if they are causal of a failure. Excuse me. Next slide. So then when we look at the kind of the challenges, monitoring isn't enough, right? Operation of the data is the next step. And that means integrating DERMS and virtual power plants to relieve local pressure, especially in neighborhoods or campuses where traditional upgrades you're not going to be able to implement them fast enough. Fleet-specific tariffs, which I am a huge proponent of, can help shift charging patterns, reduce system-wide stress. These can be anything from kind of demand mitigation tariffs. There's a couple of examples. One of my favorite is SMUD. They have something called storage share, where they have batteries in line in the system that customers can purchase a part of, and they go on a special rate, and they use that battery system to basically peak shave. But the truth of the matter, the operators can use it for whatever, and it's paid for by the customer, but it helps out the entire grid. These types of tariffs only work, however, when they're paired with strong partnerships between utilities, fleets, and municipalities. And that's why, give another shout out to the great folks at SMUD, Paul Lau, who's just a phenomenal leader, executive. He's amazing. Rachel Wong, who's just so far on the innovation curve. She's leaving us all behind. They know that going out, and Nancy, the board director, just integral work with the community to build these relationships so they can build these structures and really have an impact. And finally, like this is where advanced technology steps in, right? So AI-based forecasting, adaptive protection schemes, and smart transformers are no longer futuristic concepts. They're here. They're tools that utilities like SMUD are deploying today to align with fast moving like electrification demands, right? As we electrify more, we do fleets, school buses, we have to have these technologies kind of in place. And so, you know, we'll hear from JT today, but the playbook for safe electrification in Texas isn't theoretical. It's being written now, sometimes in blood, as we learn from our errors, but through collaboration, through a lens of innovation, through a willingness to rethink traditional models. This is what it takes. I've had several conversations this week on kind of a deconstruction, reconstruction approach in terms of figuring out how we build a safer, more reliable grid from the distribution system all the way up through the transmission system. So with that, I'm going to pause here. I'm going to turn it over to JT. I cannot thank you enough for giving me this platform so I can kind of spread the word on the changing system and the impacts that I know we can have.
Absolutely. And I always love to sit back and just listen to you go because I think you and I shared a stage in Austin one time at the LBJ Library, and I just sat back in awe. This was during our ADER days when we were talking about it. And I have some data I want to share with you on the back end of this when we go into the Q&A, because I think I'd love to get your take on it. But I appreciate that, man. So, just to kind of, before really diving into Texas, right? And as Drew mentioned, like the load growth piece, right? It's there. I mean, some of the numbers you see on just data centers outside of electrification, it's just staggering on the gigawatts of energy that are going to be needed in this state going forward, just on data centers alone, and not couple, you haven't even started to add, fleet electrification and mass transit electrification and the such. So, but before we dive into Texas, let's take a step back, widen the aperture a little bit, and just look at what a lot of the states are doing, right? And I'll give credit to the folks at NC State Clean Energy Technology Center who do a wonderful job every quarter of putting out, kind of a survey of the different parts, grid mod, EV, PV, et cetera. And, this was from end of 24, but you can see that pretty much all but 4 states across the U.S. have taken some action on electric vehicles, and with the legislation in like 34 of those states, right? And you can see, right? It's not just, where it used to be kind of a left coast, right coast thing, right? When you thought about technology and EV and PV, heart of America, right here in Texas. I mean, we're dealing with that, right? And we're looking at what's going on and the impact. And then I want to take an even larger aperture here and look across at probably the country or the market actually that is most similar to Texas, right? Which is Australia. And I say that because, right, Australia has a market, AMO, which is just like ERCOT. It's an energy only with ancillary services market, covers the southern and eastern portions of the country. And granted, they have a fraction of the people that we have here in Texas, but they also dwarf us in size as far as just pure landmass. And the energy market operator really kind of taught a class on forecasting and getting it wrong. And it started really in 2015 with rooftop solar, where they had projected that by the end of 23 there'd be 10,000 gigawatt hours of solar. When you actually got to the end of that, there was over 30,000 gigawatt hours of rooftop solar and by the end of 23 and 24. And a lot of that, right, is driven by, it's heavily incentivized at both the state and federal level, and it's a lot cheaper. It's like a fifth of the cost that it is here. But over there right now, 1 in every 3 homes across the continent has rooftop solar, in their footprint, right? Now, flip that to what we're really here to talk about, right, which is EVs and electrification, right? Again, they taught a master class in getting a projection wrong, right? In 22, they forecasted, that they would see about a 12% adoption rate by the end of 2030. You literally a year later, they flipped that number from 12% to 21% of EV adoption by 2030. And we've heard that that forecast is actually going to be closer to 40% by 2030 on most indications. So why do I bring this up, right? And I think the important thing about that is that what we've learned, and I think Drew highlighted on this a little bit, and his point is that you have to have visibility. What we've learned elsewhere is that when you couple solar with electrification, primarily EV, but also, fleet and delivery vehicles and such, right? Mass transit, is that it impacts the grid. We've seen abroad that the harmonic distortions and the voltage irregularities and issues that come with these influxes of DERs is almost exponential, right? And it's not just a low growth issue, it's a power quality issue. It's seeing over voltages and overloadings, et cetera. And the way that we have the grid today, we have a blind spot, right? AMI, which has traditionally been basically the cash register for every utility, right? It's monitoring usage, and it's there to provide that usage data so consumers can be billed, is great, right? It provides a quasi, fast view of what's going on, 15-minute intervals. But then you also have what is more needed in a real-time basis in the world of like SCADA, but that stops at the substation in many, if not all cases. So there's a blind spot between the SCADA and the AMI where visibility is really needed. And that's where we kind of talk through and what the Australians have really taught us on the need for low voltage monitoring to really go out there and understand really at a feeder level what's really going on. How are these impacting us? And it's not about just the impact side of it, Drew. I would say it's also being able to understand, well, how many more EVs can I take on this transformer before I overload it and cause it to blow? Or where can I actually put a mass transit EV station right here? Because like I don't know if I can actually serve that load with my existing infrastructure. So having that is important, and the Australians have done it, and they've done it well. And what they've done in rolling out grid visibility is to be able to start to not only save money from an OpEx perspective, right? And being able to limit the number of truck rolls and being able to better manage how they're going to do these change outs or these upgrades. But they've also been able to actually, I won't say defer CapEx, but be able to reallocate it to other investment opportunities, right? Because you're able to save on one side and be able to reallocate it in another. And the one thing that I would highlight, even from an OpEx truck roll, our friends at Vermont Electric have been running a project over the last year where they've rolled out, on their way to 85 cents. They got 50 right now. But what they've been able to do is they've actually, by giving that real-time visibility, where they have had an increase in solar and a very large increase in electric vehicle demand from their members, they've actually been able to save money in limiting the number of truck rolls, because with that visibility, they've now been able to identify areas where they needed to take corrective action that they could do from the control room and not have to roll a truck, right? And that has both an economic impact, but it also has one would say a societal impact, right? Because you don't have people without power. As Drew and I can attest from being here in Beryl, folks can act a fool when you leave them without power for any more than a couple hours. So, the one last thing I'll highlight here, especially as it relates to electrification, is something that our friends at Endeavor Energy did a couple years ago. And to put it into perspective, Endeavor Energy they have roughly, now it's somewhere around 1.2 million customers that they serve. If you think of Sydney on the east coast of Australia, they kind of take that the suburbs of western and southern Sydney, right? Not downtown Sydney proper. And so, for those of us that live in Texas, kind of think of it as everything outside the loop here in Houston, right? Is probably the best way to describe it. But so what they had to do was Endeavor was charged by the city of Sydney, right, to electrify a bus depot, right? Because Sydney is going the way of really getting rid of fossil fuel for their bus fleets for mass transit. So there was one particular bus depot that sat in kind of the northwest corner of the suburbs, and they were going to have to take this bus depot and put in 36 bus charging stations there. And in order to do that, they were going to have to upgrade the transformer there on site. Originally when they planned it, they were thinking they were going to need a 3 MVA transformer to do that. And in order to do that, they were going to have to dig up roughly about a kilometer worth of underground line to put down larger piping, if you will, larger conduit, and then have that 3 MVA transformer. So what we did with them was we started monitoring the other 5 transformers that kind of center or serve that area where the bus depot was going to do the flip out. They took the data, the real-time loading data off of that, and loaded it into a model that they had prepared that was looking at bus schedules, charging schedules, et cetera. And what they determined is actually if you manage the other transformers, right, you really only needed about a 1.5 MVA transformer, so about half the size. And you actually when you did that, only needed to dig up about 200 meters worth of earth in order to run some line. And so their CapEx went from about 6.5 million down to 2.5 million. And it was a project, you can actually find it out online, their pilot project that they wrote a report about. Now they're going to do this with the other 25 locations that they have to go out and do around Greater Sydney. So it's a great case study on really just taking the data, that real-time data, and understanding like what can you do? What way could you actually manage your existing infrastructure while doing maybe a smaller upgrade to the infrastructure to allow for this electrification to take place. So great example. And like I said, this is out there online that folks can go and check out. So that's all I've got to share. Now, what I'll kind of stop sharing here, Drew, and you and I can start to kind of talk a little bit about some of this stuff. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up to you that I thought was important was we talk about electrification, and folks probably on this are probably sitting there going, well, why that's no big deal. But where I find us coming into a critical issue is that NREL put out a report last year, right, that said that our transformer fleet is aging like really bad, like 80+% of our transformers are reaching end of life. And they also said that, the demand for transformers due to electrification and data centers and just overall load growth is going to increase by 160 and 180%. And they also added that I think any of us who've been to DTEC in the last couple of years can attest to is that you can't exactly get one today if you wanted it, right? You order it and you get in the queue 2 years later, you might get one. So like I bring all this up to say, like, Drew, like when you look at Texas, right? And I pulled some data and it was crazy. It's amazing what Grok will do for you when you ask it very specific questions. But at least according to that, it's saying that we're adding a new charger installation, new residential EV charger every 5 minutes in this state.
Yeah.
That a new EV is being purchased every 6 minutes. That we're getting a new electric delivery van purchased every 4 hours. And a new electric bus is being purchased every 6 days in this state.
Yeah.
And couple that with the fact that on average, if you just look at normal average, like no other impacts happening, failure rates of 2.5% per year on transformers, we're seeing 20 transformers a day fail throughout the state of Texas.
That's right.
My question, I bring all that up to say, are we running into a major problem?
Well, so the short answer is yes, but I'm going to kind of, everyone on this call probably doesn't resonate with them on kind of EV growth because you're tossing numbers and it's a little ethereal. But I'm going to go to something I think that everyone's a little bit more comfortable with, which is solar, and then I'll get back to EVs. Right. So at the end of 2024, Texas had approximately 20 megawatts of total solar generating capacity, encompassing both utility scale and small scale. Right. But on the small scale side, installed capacity for small scale solar, which included residential and commercial rooftop systems, accounted for about 1/7 of Texas total solar capacity. So right around 3,000 megawatts, right? So you have 20 gigawatts of solar, and about 3 gigawatts of that is dedicated to rooftop and other small scale solar systems. Guess what's not on those small scale solar systems? Any type of utility awareness of the operating state of those. And so it kind of, and this is, if I can pass any nugget to anyone, like I use relatively broad numbers. Remember, it's always better to be reasonably accurate than precisely wrong. So don't go down to the decimal, just kind of keep it right in there, right? So if I'm a little off, I'm in the ballpark, right? And
Directionally correct.
Yeah. So the takeaway is, right, the local transformer in your neighborhood, right, the one that's connecting, 4 houses to you. The city had the awareness is basically when it was installed. And so how do you go and do wholesale replacement of that level of infrastructure without bankrupting like a local utility or an IOU? There has to be operational approaches that will allow utilities to have awareness of what's going on, to see when those panels are producing, when they're not producing, what the impact is. Because by the way, and this is the grid was built 100 years ago out of a friend, Louis Ting, out of LADWP. I think in 2019 or 2020, he replaced a substation that was a continuous operation for 100 years. So kind of, yeah, think of that, right? In the middle of LA, at a substation that had been continuously operating for 100 years. That's the technology we're dealing with, right? And so when you look at this level of technology that was built for electricity to flow in one way, and now we're asking it to do something dynamic with solar, which is potentially for it to be bidirectional. We don't, in absolute terms, know the ramification of that on the infrastructure. And so it's even that much more critical for it to be able to be monitored with grid monitoring systems and some type of health system on those transformers. Now, extrapolating this to EV charging, it's a new paradigm in that you're getting these huge nodal load growths that have high peaks and very low lows in terms of actual, flow through. How is that going to impact systems that were not prepared for it, that were not designed for it? And that's where having just a dedicated kind of innovation-based approach to having a grid level understanding. As I mentioned before with Virginia, it is the need of a board operator, whether it's in the distribution system or the transmission system, to understand ahead of time what is going on in these systems so that they can accurately do what they do, which is engineer the hell out of these systems so that they're stable and they're resilient.
Yeah, that bidirectional piece, right? Like I don't know, it's the V2G thing sounds so cool, right? It really does. I think that's awesome, right? But it also scares hell out of me because if a given transformer has a certain rating, let's say it's 150 kVA rating, right? One way, like by nature, it can't take more than that either way, right? Like and there's granted there are plenty of utilities out there. In fact, one that's adjacent to our operating territory here in Texas, or actually here in Houston, that says they run their transformers at 100 to 140 to 150% overload and just run that sumbitch to failure.
Yeah.
And like I can't wrap my head around that, right? Like you've been on that side of that, right? You've been at the utility side. Like, why?
So you go to Coeur d'Alene in Idaho, right? And you see these tiny little transformers on all these homes, and you look at, like, from a climate perspective, what this little area has gone through in terms of change, right? Where Coeur d'Alene is beautiful, but in terms of like load profile for the average house there, always really low. The weather is just, in the summer, it's perfect, right? It's like, mid to low 70s. You're on the water, you get a breeze. In the winter, you either have wood stoves or natural gas. That ain't what it is anymore, right? They're getting 100-degree days, right? And so those transformers, they were designed to 140% capacity in 1970. That ain't what it is today, right? So now they're running them until basically they pop, because this is, if I were to go and do wholesale change outs of transformers before they fail, that's a lot of value that should have been in the community that's not. And that's kind of the issue I think that utilities face. the understanding of the need to transform doesn't necessarily correlate with the expense for that transformation in terms of the actual impact. And so if there are workarounds or ways they can get to smart transformers without having to actually change out transformers, that's a huge benefit for any community because it stretches out this capital investment and allows for your we used to call them ratepayers. Sometimes they call them customers now, but they're really partners, right? So
Yes.
how you talk to your partners in the community so that you can effectively and efficiently transform your utility and your distribution systems and theoretically your transmission systems in a manner that is minimally impactful to that community.
Well, and real quick, I'll pause real quick for those who are on the cast here. Like, by all means, if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A. Drew and I can see them. We'll be happy to answer those. But thinking about that planning piece, right? And I actually heard a little bit about this, at a recent conference, and we were talking about, when you think about electrification, let's say, the EV programs that a lot of utilities are running right now, managed charging. Are you seeing from your side, like especially on the consulting side, but even thinking about your days at CPS, are you seeing a lot more of the breaking of the silos where the program design and the distribution planning and the distribution ops and even the asset management are all now kind of in the same room, virtually or otherwise, kind of talking through the impacts, good, bad, or indifferent, on what a program design or what a electrification initiative would do?
Yeah. I'll start by saying this. So Justin Chamberlain and Rick Luna did all the work, and I got all the credit at CPS Energy. So first of all, let me just extrapolate that, right? So they built the first managed charging program. They built the over $900 million of expense in the Save for Tomorrow energy plan, which has been just a massive success. Our portfolio over 300 megawatts, well, nearing 300 megawatts of demand response. All of these were done well in advance of kind of what the need is now. So CPS Energy has kind of this technical, instead of technical debt, right? They have this technical kind of savings or capital investment that they've made that eliminates some of the strain that they see on the system because they built up this huge buffer, trained a community in demand response, knows about efficiency and conservation, and is focused on it. It's literally built into the IRP. So many utilities will not build, demand response and energy conservation into the IRP. And shout out to Corey Kuczynski, the CFO. Like, it's built in there, and you can see it, and so you know what the expectation is. So to that question, the answer is yes. But here this is the kind of flip side of it, right? These, they were termed negawatts, in the past. The mitigation of future load and how it impacts some of that, may not come to fruition, right? When you look at electric vehicle fleets, that you can't always shift, some of their utilization as they replace internal combustion engine vehicles. That doesn't mean you don't want to do it. That doesn't mean you don't want that. It just takes different kind of constructs that utilities will have to put in place to support those customers. Look, the writing's on the wall. Electrification is coming. It adds a certain value to the community that you want to have it. You don't want to do without it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't come with its challenges, and those challenges have to be planned for at the highest level. If the CEO is not looking at this every day as part of kind of their overall strategy and portfolio, then eventually they will, right? And it's going to be painful. And so the good news is, especially, I can vouch for public power. It's always topical. And for the most part, I always Carolyn Wynn from San Diego Gas and Electric, Clint Bullock at OUC. And even when we talk to Jason, it's top of mind. And I'll cover this, if we have time, but when you look at what board members of utilities are, what they find critical, like, this is one of those things that is, you always have to have an answer to that question at the executive level.
That's interesting. It brings up a good kind of follow up around, investment in distribution, right? because you and I were talking, for those that weren't on earlier, actually before we actually started. I was asking Drew. It just came out yesterday that there's a new Senate bill, SB 75, that is setting up a commission here in the state of Texas. It's all around grid security, and granted, you say grid security has a very wide, broad definition, right? And the bill, and just scanning it, is talking about cybersecurity and EMP and source of supply, making sure everything's good. But it just seems like it's a lot of transmission focused, right, and not a lot of distribution focused. Are we turning a blind eye to distribution, Drew? Like, is it just I mean, because all I hear is transmission, transmission, transmission.
Yeah, so it's like we work a lot with CenterPoint Energy, well, or at least we look at what CenterPoint Energy is doing, right? And we look at some of the more innovative companies when it comes to DERs and VPPs and the Teslas of the world that have these kind of installed kind of microgrids. There's so much uncertainty, while at the same time the highest expectations are there. Somewhere around the late 1990s, outages became unacceptable. Like when I was growing up in the 70s, like it was an outage and you moved on. But you have to look at it. One, the weather, right? That's an impact, but also like the internet is critical to work. Your communications are now handled by, completely electronically. Before, when the power went out, the phone line still worked somehow magically, right? That no longer happens. So digitally, we're a digital society, have to have electricity. The second piece is, we're switching to electric transportation. And so, if you don't have power, then it can impact your ability to move around the community. And so at the distribution system level, there is zero tolerance for an outage. And that's unfortunate because, at the end of the day, these are machines, these are systems, they do fail. And holding the senior executives at utilities that run, T&D systems accountable for zero defects puts them almost in an impossible spot, right? They can keep the grid running, or they can try to innovate and bring the grid of the future, right? And that's where the impact and the impasse really is. Because if I do something innovative and it causes a failure, I won't be here to do anything else, right? I'll be gone, right? And so there is a bias, a forcing function towards blocking and tackling, and not towards innovation. Additionally, from a financial perspective, like there's not a great rate of return in kind of an acceptable time frame for innovation. And this goes all the way to the IOU level, right? So and we'll actually shift out, and I'll bring in generation into the picture, right? So a nuclear plant like Vogtle is a huge risk to bring along, right? But with that risk is a great amount of reward. But if you have like a Duke Energy, they can only get an 8% return on their investment. So their upside is completely tapped out, right? So that 8%, no matter how good it does, that's what they're going to get. But that low, talk to my friends at Southern, they'll tell you, right? They're torn in the knots over this thing. And so you can extrapolate that all the way down to distribution systems and the investments that we put there. There's a risk reward ratio here that's out of balance that probably needs to be fixed with kind of some regulatory and compliance work. And we need to have like a Rushi on to talk about that, because this is one of those things that's going to be permissive, and it's going to hold us up from building the grid of the future.
Is there a lot? I mean, you highlighted CPS and how well it has done with, like managed charging, with what, Justin and Rick did. Again, shout out to those guys. Is there a lot of like, what percentage, I guess, let me ask you a different one. What percentage of EV owners do you think on average are signing up for any type of managed charging program? Because I'm assuming it's probably low. And why do you think that is, assuming that it is low?
So it depends. If you are a new owner, you're going to be excited. You're going to look up all the programs. Our mutual friend Lon has one of the best EV programs in the world. It's super innovative. And finds customers, and they sign up in mass because it's just a great opportunity. Once again, it's a risk reward equation where you have to kind of taper your enthusiasm as you sign up because you want to learn what the impacts are over time. Now, in Duke, they're subscribed, right? They've maxed out their subscription. And so as they get more tranches, they'll open up more subscriptions, but essentially they're going as fast as the utility will allow. And for all, and I know we're speaking to a very kind of integrated audience. Everyone on this call probably knows or aware of the utility, but it's a risk averse environment. Like, the lights go out, you lose your job, and I want to reemphasize that. And even if it's a giant hurricane that comes in, and it's clearly like the hand of the cosmos that's doing it, there's still an opportunity for for catastrophe on the kind of administrative side that you want to mitigate. So, kind of going back to your question, T&D side at the distribution service level, all the way down to managed charging. I think there's an integration issue, right? A take rate for these programs, but the issue is both on the side of kind of the consumers as well as utilities. The consumer side in terms of both awareness as well as willingness to sign up for utility programs, but on the utility side, just a natural risk aversion that comes with our industry. And as a customer, I'm not sure if I want to change that because I don't want my lights to go out.
Yeah. Well, I've always said, going back 20 years, that the easy way to customer adoption of any program is the juice has got to be worth the squeeze, right? There's got to be some coin involved for me to go do something, right? Back when, it reminded me of I think it was like 08, 09, I guess it was, or not, I think it's 9, 10, when San Onofre out in California went down. And I think San Diego Gas was incentivizing anybody with a programmable thermostat. They were incentivizing me $1.50 a kilowatt hour to shed load during an event. And I'm sitting there thinking, for $1.50 a kilowatt hour, I will shut the power off at the damn main. We are all going to dinner out tonight. But cut that check. But that being said, I could foresee an issue arising, right? And we're seeing this a little bit in Australia. And I think this could be an interesting model for Texas. I really do. And I'm going to use the example of the battery side of it, solar and storage, because I do think there's a carryover to the EV side. Mm-hmm. But over there, right, again, they're set up just like Texas, where the wires carriers or the TDSPs, to use our lingo, they cannot touch the end customer, right? You have Gen Taylors. So you got the Reliance and the TXUs and of the world over there. They're Origin Energy and AGL and Energy Australia. Right. But different names, same thing. But so they control the customer, and then you have the wires carrier. But so they may take an aggregation of VPP of solar and storage, and they're going in and they're trying to take advantage of, $16,000 a megawatt hour price spike in the wholesale market. And it has been $16,000, $17,000 Australian, which is like 10, 11,000 US, right? But the thing that's starting to emerge over there, which I think would be an interesting model here in Texas, and again, thinking about it from an EV side, where you've got a fleet of buses, whether they're school or mass transit or fleet that's just sitting idly by with ample storage and bi-directional capabilities, is on a day, let's say here in ERCOT, right? Because this is the model that's starting to emerge in Australia, is that here in Houston, there's a $5,000 price spike in ERCOT, and my aggregator says, hey, there's an opportunity to go get you some coin. But then CenterPoint comes in and says, I'll actually pay you $5,100 not to do a damn thing, because if you do, you're killing the system that's serving you right now, right? Locally, right? So you have this competing wholesale versus, localized, or wholesale versus distribution kind of competitive opportunity, which, as an asset owner, I'm sitting there going, great, it's a layered approach, right? So for the 50 hours a year that the distribution system pays me to not do something, to sit on my hands, great. But for the other 700, 8,600 hours of the year, my aggregator's taking this out, and I'm getting, they're monetizing, off the investment I've made, right, on my behalf. I think that could be interesting here. Right? Like, it's a value stacking approach. It's always been in batteries, right? I say always, but the national labs came up with that model a few years back. I mean, I don't see why that couldn't be a model here, where if you an EV owner, if you're, the city of Dallas that has, electrified bus fleets, or city of Houston's moving that direction, like on the off chance that, my retailer was going to take my excess, storage, bidirectionally into ERCOT, CenterPoint says, hey, I tell you what, please don't do that. And by the way, it's actually more money for you to sit on your hands and do nothing, right? I mean, I know there's a lot to work out from that, but why couldn't that work here?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about that model. It's something I think, one, I'll say that everything needs to be explored, right? We are in, I'm not going to call it a generation crunch. I'm just going to call it a grid crunch where we're having a problem having generation along with ancillary services meet load and demand. And so whatever model works, I think we heard, Pablo, the CEO of ERCOT, say, we're taking everything, right? And so
Yeah.
if it works in Australia, I think we need to try it here. We need to test it out. And there's a lot that we are testing out. The son of Michael Dell has a great company that, he's trying something at the residential level. We've seen Bitcoin miners make more money, or cryptocurrency miners make more money in Texas off of not running on DR contracts than actually, making cryptocurrency. And so it's a natural extrapolation kind of to the model, that you intimated about.
Yeah.
But my answer is all of those, everything, right? We can't build enough generation to satisfy demand. There are 50 significant data centers coming into Texas, 50 right now, probably more. But I'm gonna choose a nice number that's in the middle, so I'll only be a little bit wrong and not a lot wrong, right? And then on top of that, if you wanted to build a combined cycle plant, and you ordered a turbine, you're not going to get it until the 2030s, maybe mid 2030s.
Yeah.
Nuclear is tough to site, and what's even tougher than nuclear is transmission. So even if you were to be able to site it and build it, it's going to take longer to get transmission to that site than it will actually to build the plant. So all that being said, yes, whatever you just said, yes, and more.
Well, I think what it does, right, is starting, and this has been, almost, you could almost argue it's a tale as old as time, but it's assigning a locational value to the resource, right? Like, we all like fleet owners, Amazon does a great job, as you mentioned earlier. I know they're watching, they watch the market. They are very smart at managing their own energy and their own energy spend. But, John Q. Public, Jane Q. Public, right? Most folks don't care, other than when they get that $600 bill here in Texas during, like when I got mine last year. But I do think for those in the electrification world, right, having knowledge of the fact that your asset, or assets in the case of fleet owners, like, has a locational value, right? It's not just hey, I can go get $5,000 in ERCOT right now because, hey, come get you some. It's that, hey, I'm actually able to, it's that non-wires alternative approach that is now could be of value here to Encore and CenterPoint and Austin Energy and CPS and, Texas and New Mexico. I mean, like there's value in these resources locally. I would argue we have done a horrible job evaluating that and actually creating both infrastructure and programs that would actually incentivize participation in doing that, right? I mean, that would be my argument.
Yeah, and I'm going to use an example again because I know we're coming close on time here. There was a blackout in Spain a few weeks ago. I believe it was the 24th of April, and it was, the causal factors are still kind of being discussed. It's believed to be a couple of plants stripped offline, and it just and just for everyone's awareness, Texas has, roughly about 7 gigawatts of battery storage in the same size grid as Spain has, maybe a little bit bigger, but Spain has 33 megawatts. So an order of magnitude difference, right? And then on top of that, they just don't have like a lot of inertia in their system, right? And so essentially within minutes or seconds, plants went off, and then the inverter-based power couldn't keep the frequency where it needed to be. And their good friends next door in France said adios because you're not taking us with you, and they cut them off, right? And so this is where when we look at the grid and we put in locational value for things and nodes, where we put in shock absorbers into the design of the system. Maybe you do have, an EV charging station that you have EVs plugged up that can take in some of that load, and you can use them as kind of a, some type of reactionary storage system. Those are things that they have value. We just have to figure out, how we put them in and how we put the economic incentives. And this is once again, this is where policy is so important. It's not just engineering. From the physics perspective, we can make everything work. We'll figure that out. But the policy has to kind of follow the physics. And until they do, you have great companies out there with kind of workarounds that will allow you to do things until the policy catches up.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's right. I think that's right. Well, I know we're coming close to the end of time here. I guess, Drew, it's just kind of one final kind of takeaway or leave behind, from your end, and then I'll wrap things up from this end. But what's a good takeaway, leave behind for folks that are listening here who pull this up later?
Well, so the biggest is like the grid, both from a transmission and distribution system standpoint of today, is not going to be the grid of tomorrow. And we don't know what it is, and we should have all brains kind of focused on it. Now, I'm very fortunate. KPMG is an amazing, thought synchronization organization around kind of the future in terms of strategy of utilities, of power. But it's not just a firm. It's not just all the firms. It's not just everyone has to have a maniacal focus on what the future looks like. And maybe even more importantly, be willing to test and learn into it, to bring in innovative technologies from Australia, from Europe, from wherever, and see if they work. ERCOT, PJM, KISO, they're all slightly different. They all should be trying different things in order to make it work. And so, to put a kind of pin on it, if we keep doing today, for what we're doing and don't change for tomorrow, we will be in trouble. And I don't want to end on a pessimistic note, because I think the future is bright. We have AI, we have, EVs, we have glasses that look and tell you things, and they're smart, but everything is electrifying. And so we have to be prepared and welcoming of that future. And that's where the real work starts for utilities and the companies that support those utilities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think, just kind of picking up on what you had said earlier, right? That, electrification is coming in some way, shape, or form. It is coming, especially here to Texas, but definitely, across the country, right? And some are moving in that direction faster than others, and that's okay. But at the key piece to this is that that journey doesn't come without problems. And one of the biggest problems is, addressing, the impact these resources are going to have both now and in the future. And having visibility at that edge is critical to that. We've seen it in Australia. We're starting to see it here as we look at in working with groups here. So, I like to say you don't know, you don't know how the hell to get there if you don't know where you are today, right? And so just getting that real time look into what's going on will only help you better plan and prepare and design that grid of the future that you're going to need in order to take this influx of electrification that's coming. So, but with that, I want to thank tremendously my good friend, Mr. Drew Higgins. I really appreciate you. This has been fun. We will have to do this again and talk about some other stuff, but I want to thank you again. And thanks for all that have joined, and wish everyone a good remainder of the week. Take care, everybody. All right.